it is absolutely fabulous to see you. I've missed you. It's lovely to be back together again, even though we're not in the same room. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Maria. And super to see you again. I'm really looking forward to this today.
Wonderful. And I know you've been really busy, so thank you for squeezing us in. So what have you been busy doing? What are the challenges you're seeing in organizations out there at the moment?
A huge range of challenges, all the usual stuff that we see around leading teams. Plus, during the last couple of years, the key thing has been around how do we help keep everyone on board while we're not working in the same place? This whole issue about remote working and overcoming some of the impacts of virtual distance, and also the whole thing about how do we stay flexible? How do we be adaptable? Because all this time over the last 2 years, some of the time we've all had to be going to work at home, and then we started to try and come back into the workplace. And then it's like, no, we have to stop that and all go back to working at home. And everyone's feeling, well, we're taking 1 step forwards and 2 or 3 steps backwards. And that's lowering morale. So this is an issue that I'm seeing that the senior leadership teams and executive teams are quite grappling with. How do we help people feeling that, we're still making progress going forwards? It's not just stepping forwards and backwards, and we're not going backwards all the time with all these changes. So how do we keep them focused through all the apparent U-turns that we're making? And since coming out of the pandemic, and now people are like wanting to help people to get the best of both worlds. We're discovering that actually, far from what many people thought, that working from home and working remotely was totally ineffective, actually it can be super effective. So how do we help people have the best of both worlds to be able to work in the office some of the time and work from home at others, and yet still create a sense of equity and fairness across the organization? Because some people will have roles that don't allow them the option to, because they've got to be in place in order to deliver their job role. So that's a huge issue, this creating an equitable workplace where everybody feels it's a fair deal for if we're going to create a hybrid working model.
That's interesting. That really is interesting. And the point you made, a couple of points that I want to pick up on.
Yes.
And one of them is the fact you mentioned flexibility.
Yes.
But surely in organizations, and for leaders, especially leaders, we want them to be consistent. And yet you're saying they need to be flexible. Can they be both consistent and flexible? Absolutely.
I truly believe that you can. And the key here is helping people understand to see the consistency. So this is what I'm finding. In one of my talks, I use a metaphor of a sailing metaphor. So quite often what people are wanting, we've got a plan, we want to implement a plan, and they'll talk about a metaphor of we've got a roadmap. And we hear this very, very often. Leaders say, this is our roadmap of where we want to go. And what I'm really discovering quite a lot is that when people imagine a roadmap, they're also imagining there are set points at which we make the turns, at which we change direction. So we go in this direction until we reach the signpost, or the road turns left, or there is a turning. But the point is we can truly recognize it. So we see that, in the pandemic, for example, people were always wanting a set time. How many weeks do we have to wait until we can go back into the office? And the public are like, and businesses, we can't cope with the idea that it's just dependent on what's the level of the infection rates at that time. And we're not able to when we're expecting the set time point, it makes it very difficult that actually we're just waiting and seeing, and we'll just depend on what some external conditions are over which we have no control. So instead, what I try and encourage people to think about is, let's change that metaphor of the roadmap. Let's change it to navigating across an open ocean. So we still have set core principles that are consistent about how we navigate across an ocean. It's particularly relevant, I think, for this sense of uncertainty and change, because if we think of, if we call these the headwinds of uncertainty and change, many people will be familiar with the phrase that you simply can't sail into a headwind. you can't even sail too close to the wind. And if you try, you suffer this huge turmoil and swirl. It's really uncomfortable. It's terrifying. There's lots of noise. And it's that uncomfortableness that we're trying to keep on doing the same old thing that we were doing because we're heading in the same direction that we wanted to go. So in sailing terminology, we would call it, we need to tack. We need to tack across the wind. So we're heading first one way, away from the wind in one direction. Then before we get too far away from our desired direction, we will then cross and turn across the wind in the other direction. So to someone who doesn't understand the principles that are consistent, the sort of sailing navigational principles of how we have to get the wind moving across the sail in order to create power to have any forward motion, they will simply say, oh my goodness, they don't know what they're doing. They're trying to go that way first of all, and then they're going that way, and then they're going that way. They're making all sorts of U-turns. They're going backwards and forwards. It's complete chaos. So that's when we have to educate them. No, this is truly consistent. We have a desired direction. We are consistently making progress towards our direction. It is physically impossible to sail into that wind. And so we're using consistent principles about how to navigate into the wind in order to make some progress forwards, even if we're diverting side to side a little bit, but it's still having that consistent progress forward. And that is what helps people start to feel there is some consistency. And in an organization, our core principles are not the sailing principles of how, the way you set the sail to the wind and how you set the boat against the waves, neither of which you can control, the waves and the wind and the weather. In an organization, your core principles are your purpose, your mission statement, your core values, the way that we want to behave, it's our strategy, all those things we can use and show the consistency. And in terms of the leaders, their consistent behavior is how they show in the way that they are, the confidence that they can show to people. I can talk much more about that. We'll come back to it maybe in a while. But it's being the way that we are being a leader. If that can remain consistent, then some of the actions that we take are the flexible actions that we take to respond to outside conditions that are beyond our control. Does that help to show we can be both flexible and consistent?
Yeah, it sort of shows that there are certain aspects that remain consistent, as you said, like the values, like the mission statement, like where we're trying to get to, and the behaviors, and yet we need to be flexible because we don't know what way the wind is going to go. And if I'm going to get seasick, which is quite possible.
It is quite possible.
So we haven't talked about something which I thought would have come up by now, actually. How important is trust? Because I think trust for some of us, I think, has been shaken, certainly in authority over the last couple of years. How important is trust at the moment in the organizations?
It is enormously important. And trust is something that is sometimes overlooked. I think we sometimes perhaps take it for granted. We don't really think about it. Interestingly, I'm sure you've heard of Stephen Covey, and then the younger Stephen Covey as well. But he is talking about trust is the new currency in the modern world. And it is so true. The trust is, I think, was I talking a bit earlier about the impacts of all the different distances and virtual distance. The affinity distance that is often overlooked because it comes out through quite subtle things and the social interactions. The key impact of that is that if we're not considering how to manage that, it erodes trust. And I think this is why a lot of organizations are finding that trust is being eroded at the moment. What you're talking there as well about, we're losing some trust in authority and in the way that, our governments have responded to certain things, and particularly in politics at times. Some of the key attributes of trust are that we believe in the integrity of our leaders. And that comes out through some of the consistency that we were talking about earlier. But integrity is so very important. And in the way that we demonstrate that we trust our people is really important as well. And your credibility, your integrity, and and your capabilities. If people believe you have the right capabilities, that's also important. And interestingly, I think one of the things that has really come up is the way that a lot of leaders get training in project management, and the leadership training you have is very often about the doing stuff, you know, the strategic side of things that you need to do, managing the business side, all the things that we need to do as a leader. And what I find quite often happens is, particularly where you have people with professional expertise and they're now managing a large number of other people who also have share their professional expertise, and they're thinking about, you know, I need to add value here. I'm here as a leader. My role here is to share my expertise as much as anything else. And what they tend to find is they're trying to still do the things with their expertise directly, to directly use their expertise in the way that has been truly successful for them to get things done before. And quite often they're trying to manage their teams in the way that you would manage a project. And it's actually very different, because we can't think about controlling people. We need to be always thinking about influencing people. And that's a key piece, where as soon as we start doing the behaviors that look like we're trying to control them and control what's happening all the time, that can be perceived that actually you don't trust them to be able to do their job. That may or may not be the case. And it's very often the fact that leaders are not intending to do that. They have a positive intention of sharing their expertise in the way that they know how. And that's quite a big leadership step, to shift from direct input to leading indirectly through other people.
That's interesting. That is interesting. Of course, that control thing, that micromanagement piece, influencing, and the whole trust and integrity. So one of the things you talk about, and I'm wondering if this is relevant to the whole trust, probably relevant to every part of leadership, but self-leadership is something you talk about, and that's important. Do you think that leaders practice self-leadership enough? Should they be doing more? What can you tell us about how they could be working on that?
Self-leadership is really interesting, and I think that we very often don't do enough of it. It's something, again, that perhaps we take for granted. We assume it's going to happen, and I very often address it through things around how we manage our own well-being. How do we manage our work-life balance? Are we doing enough to renew our energy so that we can be our best? Are we aware of how do we inspire trust from others? How do we raise our own self-confidence and manage our own mental models for how we show up in the world, so that we inspire confidence of others in us, if you get what I mean? So this whole piece of self-leadership, there's a lot of people go, oh, well, I'm not responsible for leading other people. And it's like, well, if we're not leading ourselves, then we're likely not going to be leading other people well. It's really quite interesting. The way that we are showing up has an influence on everyone around us. So the way that we're thinking about things and the way that we behave, the way that we're feeling, influences the way that other people think and feel and behave around us. And this is a key thing to consider for all leaders. It's also really important for people managing their own lives, whether or not you're in a leadership role yourself. And very often the events that I do are quite often brought into organizations under the well-being piece rather than self-leadership. But actually, it's all a part of it, because if you're leading yourself well, you will ensure that you do have high well-being. So that's sort of an interesting sort of aspect of it, I think.
I also imagine that the well-being part of it will have a huge impact on your own personal resilience.
Mm.
And you were saying that, you know, how you behave, absolutely agree with you, how a leader behaves has a knock-on effect on everybody else. And I suppose if you are able to deal with your well-being and be resilient, that will support and help others.
Yes.
I mean, everybody's talking about resilience. Is it still relevant? Is it more relevant? Should we be focused on it still, or has that moved on? Has that ship sailed, seeing as you like to talk about ships?
Resilience is always going to be important. Resilience is how we deal with all the ups and downs in life. Nobody is ever going to have a life that is 100% plain sailing. We just don't do it. And actually, I suspect that you might get a little bit bored if there was no even slight up and down. You know, that the world is not. It's just simply not constant. So we need to be able to cope with the fact all of us are going to experience, if not in work, then certainly in our personal lives, some things that we are going to struggle to get through. We're going to lose loved ones. We're going to lose pets. There's going to be accidents. You know, we need to find some way to have some acceptance that there are things that are going to happen that we cannot prevent. The whole cycle of life requires death at the end of it. It's just a part of life. And so we need to be able to have the resilience to cope when things are not going well. And so resilience is a really, really important piece. It helps us maintain our sense of self-identity, of self-worth, or our confidence. All of these both play into our resilience and are affected by our resilience. So it's constantly dynamic. And for me, I can't believe I haven't spoken yet about mindset, because just about everything I do is from the perspective of our mindset. So our mindset is the set of attitudes that we hold that explain what's happening in the world around us. It determines how we interpret situations that are going on. And when we can shift the way that we're thinking about things and feeling about things, that can truly shift how well we cope with whatever's happening. So it'll help us to raise our resilience. It helps us to raise our confidence, and we can truly be aware of our mental models by listening to the words that we're telling ourselves. So one of the key tips I give for people is, you know, when things are going on, ask yourself, what's my story? What am I telling myself here? Because this is how we start detecting what our mental model is. How are we explaining and interpreting this situation? And you know, we all have different experiences, we all have different backgrounds, we tend to interpret situations in different ways depending on the mental model that we're holding at any particular time. And what happens is, if we can change that mental model, that may help us find a new perspective, that may help us to be more resilient. It will help us find an opportunity or a way around the barriers that up to now are just a brick wall. And one of the ways I help people think about this is, imagine, you know, it's like changing your glasses. If you're trying to read, you know, a piece of paper like this, and you're wearing long distance glasses, everything is fuzzy and out of focus. If you're trying to look into the distance with a pair of reading glasses, everything is fuzzy and out of focus. But if we try and change our glasses, suddenly we'll see, oh, well, actually, I can change the situation, or change our sunglasses. And some of them will have blue lenses or brown lenses. When you put them on, the whole world seems to change color. So it's that kind of thing, just thinking about how can I recognize what's my mental model and understand what are some of the assumptions that I've been unconsciously making as a result of that mental model. So if I can change that model, change the assumptions, change the way I'm thinking, what new perspectives open up? And that is a hugely important piece of how we can stay resilient. We can turn can't do thinking into can do thinking. We turn fear into a little bit of excitement. It is transformational. And in my talks, I talk about that through, you know, when we were sailing through huge winds and seas where I'm completely terrified. I talk about exactly that with, there's a story I have with experience last year, my horse had a really bad accident, and it could have been a lot worse. And I realized that he was just becoming quite dangerous with the way he was reacting to everything. And I realized that actually I had in my mind that he was constantly going to cause another accident. And in actual fact, that was instigating this really dysfunctional relationship that we had. Changing my story, choosing to trust myself, as well as choosing to trust in the horse, utterly transformed this horse into a really nice, safe horse. It is an amazing story, and I can talk about it in more detail in my talks. We do the same. We have a similar kind of impact on people. It's just that we don't see it quite as intensively as you will see it with a horse. Horses give us truly immediate, in-your-face feedback, and people are a little bit more polite, and they're not going to give you that level of feedback straight away about how your thinking patterns, your fears, your anxieties, your uncertainties, or your confidence, and the way that you exude confidence, the way that you show trust and belief in other people, how that can transform a situation for good or bad.
Fantastic. And actually, you mentioning horses, it works on Labradoodles too. I'm sort of being calm and relaxed, and I'm saying to myself, my Labradoodle is not going to burst into this office and interrupt our podcast. And so far, so good. I'm not sure how much longer we will achieve this, but I am trusting him to behave. So we'll see if we get away with it. Now, so coming back to everything you said, I'm sort of thinking that with every aspect, preparation must play an important part.
Huge.
Do you think we prepare enough, and do leaders prepare enough, do you think? We certainly weren't prepared for COVID, right?
No. And what is very interesting, so the science community that are involved in those kind of the research about those kind of diseases have been talking for years that we are undoubtedly going to have a pandemic. The trouble is the probability of it happening is so low, and most of us can't get our heads truly around probabilities like that. And so politicians are working on a 3 to 5 year term most of the time. We have short-termism because of what the whole cycle of getting in and out of political leadership. So it just didn't seem as a probable incident. But just like winning the lottery isn't a very probable incident for each person buying a ticket, quite often people do win the lottery. So it's because
more people prepare mentally for winning the lottery in their minds and how they're going to spend it than they do perhaps for a lot of other situations. So yes, that's quite a good example actually. So so we should be more prepared. We need to prepare more. Yes,
absolutely. But also not just prepare for low probability events like that. What we really want is to be prepared for all the things that could happen. So for example, if I return to the sailing analogy, we know, guarantee, the wind is going to change direction. We just don't know which direction it's going to change to at any particular time. But you can guarantee at some point it is going to change direction and it's going to change strength. So we have a plan for how we deal with that. So we have different size of sails that we can change the sail to be appropriate to the wind. We have a plan for how we can set the direction of the sail to the wind in order to capture the wind when it comes from different angles at the boat compared to the direction that we want to sail. So we've got all these different plans. So what happens is when the wind changes, we don't have to create a new plan on the hoof, we simply switch plans. So it makes it very easy to adapt and be flexible because we're not constantly have to make new plans. So a lot of businesses do this. They call it resilience planning. They call it strategic planning, scenario planning. In sport, they call it mental rehearsal. Visualization. We imagine the things that we would like. Well, visualization particularly, we truly start imagining the things that we would like to have as well. It's a very powerful tool because we're more likely to create the situation for it to happen. But in all these scenario plannings, what we're doing is thinking about what are the things that could happen, and if that happens, what do I need to be doing in order to be able to keep going when that happens? And so it just makes it very quick. We can just switch into that plan. So for other people, it was like, oh my goodness, how do you constantly manage to adapt and cope with all these changes? And it's just a case of, well, I've kind of thought it through and I know how I want to deal with it. You may probably already know I used to do an awful lot of scuba diving. We did a huge amount of rescue training so that in the moment of a disaster underwater, where actually things can very, very rapidly go very seriously wrong, and a lot of fatal accidents still do happen, perhaps not so many these days. But if we have the training for how to immediately respond, you know, if your supply of air is lost for any reason, you will immediately kick into that when the situation happens. And I've got several friends who find, you know, actually that training really worked. In the emergency, they just automatically went straight into the recovery and rescue drills. It works. So being able to quickly switch plans truly makes a difference to how resilient we are, how we maintain our effectiveness, and how we maintain our performance, no matter what is changing in the world around us.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask you just one last question, because our time is up.
Oh my goodness.
And there's so much great content
Sorry.
there. It's wonderful. No, don't apologize for giving us so much great content. We talked about confidence earlier on, and I don't think you finished your train of thought there because I took you somewhere else. Tell me a little bit about why leaders should be working on their confidence.
It's truly interesting. So a lot of leaders have a lot of natural self-confidence. It's what's got them into that role. And some, you know, will find themselves into a role and suddenly start having self-doubt. We do hear quite a lot about imposter syndrome. So that, if it happens to you, don't worry. It's actually surprising how many people suffer imposter syndrome. And the research seems to show that it tends to be happening, or people who are perhaps, I don't know, slightly more educated, more intelligent, and often the people who reach very, very senior roles will think, gosh, you know, I've got here a bit by chance, someone's going to find me out. You're not alone. And remember that you're comparing your inner self-doubts to the external polished exterior that people present to the world. So that comparison is not equal. So do remember that whenever you feel that sense of imposter syndrome. So why is it really important, though, for us to present a confident outlook? The key here is that as leaders, we are needing to influence people. And I hope with integrity and not manipulation type of influence. And when I say influence, I do mean influencing with integrity, or that's what I have in mind when I say leaders are wanting to influence people. Because that is the way that we help to bring people on board and have everyone on board to pull together towards that common purpose. However, in order to influence people, people need to have confidence in you. They need trust in you. They need confidence in you. And if you are not displaying confidence for whatever reason, you may be feeling uncomfortable, you know, you may be the only woman in a room full of men, for example. That's one of the very frequent reasons people show up as not showing up their normal confident self. There are many, many reasons you may not be feeling comfortable. And if that shows up as not looking confident through our body language and our tone of voice, perhaps, people will interpret your message as something you do not believe in. So if you're wanting people to believe in what you're saying, to get on board and come in on your project, then you're going to need to have confidence in that project. But if you're not addressing it all with confidence, they're not going to have confidence in you and therefore not believe in the message. So this is why it's really important that leaders are confident, that they can engender this confidence of their people. There's an awful lot we can talk about here. And one of the key things here is both trust and confidence. It's a two-way thing. So sometimes the more that you can show confidence and trust in your people, that can be a really good starting point to engender the return trust and confidence in you.
A lovely place to leave it then. So to trust and be confident in other people, and they will trust and be confident in you. Thank you, Sue. Thank you so much for all the wonderful juice and content you have given us. I hope you've enjoyed yourself.
It's been great speaking with you, Maria. Thank you very much.
Lovely. And thank you everybody for listening to The Speaker Show. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a rating on Apple Podcasts, and you can keep up with future episodes on the Speakers Associates website, which is speakersassociates.com, or your favorite podcast app. And if you would like to invite Sue to come and speak at your next conference or event, please contact Speakers Associates in plenty of time to book her, so you won't be disappointed because she's busy. So I will see you all next week. Bye-bye for now. Thank you.